All systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of the Leverage Lane Show here on the Ship It Nation YouTube station. Got my guy Alex Blickle here with me as always. Going to break down all things Valspar Championship. He'll have the single entry side covered from a leverage perspective. I'll be focusing on the MME. We'll go through it as usual, where we teach you how to play, not just who to play. And my man Alex, we got some big news right off the top. A little bit show changing because we got some ideas for today's show and to get into it all. But Akshay, Bhatia, WDs, and he's out. We've got Sam Ryder in. He was at TGL, but he's not going to play this week. So no Akshay right off the rip. He's 10K over on DraftKings. How you doing, my friend? And we'll talk about that news first.
Yeah, this is really, really kind of big news for the slate. He was one of the more popular guys up top. He was certainly one of the most popular pivots off of Fitzpatrick. We had this like almost perfect dynamic where we were going to be able to talk a lot about the conditional ownership type stuff using Akshay, Bridgman, and Fitzpatrick as kind of the focal point. And all of that's kind of thrown out the window now. And we already had Fitzpatrick pushing 40% ownership. Now he's going to be even higher. Like this is a major change to the slate. And it's kind of cool that it happened literally like 3 minutes before we went live, because it means that everyone gets to watch you and I kind of sort through what we think this means for the slate on the fly, totally organic. There's no way we could possibly have prepped for this conversation.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it'll be important when we get to it, especially when we talk about the common build and then how we could leverage it. I think everybody knows this already. You look anywhere right now, you're going to see Matt Fitzpatrick, as you mentioned, who's pretty popular, but I don't think as many people were going like Akshay, Fitz. So it was a lot of lineups, even though Akshay was getting ownership, it was a lot of lineups that could go like Akshay, skip the 9K range, for example, or something like that. So I think it was some interesting stuff there, but this is important too. I don't think people recognize this enough. I know you guys account for it. We do over at Ship It Nation with the Stone. Everybody will see it later tonight, but like the win equity in this tournament, Akshay was what, 5% of that, 6-7%, whatever you had him at. He was a solid number that is going to disperse to those guys closest around him. It makes the guys that are more likely to win more likely to win, than the others that are down the board. So it'll disperse out some, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. I got to bring up first, before we go back into any more stuff on the Valspar, the comment of the week. It said, over 35 minutes explaining waves and weather. I think we got it. This is a great start to the show because, as we say off the top of every show, we teach you how to play, not who to play. And I left the guy's name out. Don't want to embarrass him, but just saying it, I think it's still one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of DFS. And I think there's another one we'll talk about today, but that's what the show is about. We want the beginning to be evergreen. Last week's topic was wave advantages. I will say this, Alex, it was a 2-stroke advantage to the PMAM, but what people will focus on is still the same dumb shit. Oh yeah, but you needed 3 of each in the winning exact lineup that won the $1 million. So it's bullshit. It's not necessarily the case. And we talked through it a ton last week, so not to go into it again, but just anything you want to add on the Players Week. Doesn't even have to be about the wave advantage stuff. I'm just curious if you had anything else on Players Week as a whole, because in the end, I thought it was actually pretty interesting, and I've got a couple takeaways from it for sure.
Yeah, this was a conversation that came up in my Discord too, where the winning lineup is always a focal point, but also like the part of that conversation I think a lot of people miss is we should have expected the winning lineup to be a 3-3 or a 4-2 to the early. Why? Because that's what most people were playing. And so I think there were, if I remember correctly, it was like 13% of lineups had at least 4 PM AM guys. And there were maybe like 3% of lineups that were 5-1 in that direction, and less than 1% of lineups that were 6-0 in that direction. So of course it's unlikely that those are the lineups that ended up winning. It makes sense that one of the lineups that came from the other 87% won, and it's, I think, then telling that of that 87%, what lineup won? The one in the category that had the least amount of early guys. So I actually do think that the results like really bore that out. And the one thing that was kind of unique about that split was, even though there was a 2-stroke advantage, it didn't affect missed cuts as much as we would normally expect, at least from popular guys. Like most of the popular guys in that early late wave still made the cut. And it oddly, like, it also didn't keep them from getting into contention, right? Like we saw Oberg, for example, leading through 2 rounds. So it was really weird where there absolutely was this very clear late early advantage, but it didn't affect the chalky plays as much as it could have. And so I think the early late builds actually kind of got a little bit fortunate in that way, and we didn't quite get the payoff for late early builds that we probably deserved, given the way that the actual scoring played out.
Right. And good secondary point there, I think, that may be overlooked is the other thing is, like, everyone was, obviously with the Morikawa late WD for sure sucked for everybody. He played a hole. It was kind of an unfortunate event, but he's not going to back out unless he has to. I mean, it's a tough situation, but just to note it, everybody else still made the cut. It was like him and Knapp out of the top 15 or something, or 12 that didn't make the cut, but not everybody was needed up there. Like only 3 or 4 of them actually ended up showing up on the majority of winning lineups. So, I mean, that's part of it as well, but it did lead to a higher 6-6, which for you and I typically is not going to be the best. But I'll note this here. I mean, people will say whatever they want to say. I know I punched a ticket to the mega, and that's a full PM AM stack. And a couple of the comments, and I'm going to segue this. It's not some sick brag here. I mean, this is awesome. It's nice getting a ticket and getting in early, but just noting it, the Xander Matsuyama thing we talked a lot about. And if you had everybody on Morikawa and Siwoo, the guys sandwiched right between them were Xander and Matsuyama. And then you talked a lot about, hey, if we're going to go to that type of build, but stay within the common roster construction, and that's going to be this week's topic, roster construction and lineup selection, the common thought was, well, why don't you continue down the board and see what a PM AM looks like? Well, when you do this up top, and they were lower owned in some places, but this is what's interesting. My lowest owned guy is 9.22%. This is what I've talked about. The north-south build that I got to the mega last week that didn't pay off was another example of this. I could play high-owned Cam Young, but where most landed, and I'll show you more on this in a second with Giant Squid's Mega Milli winner, we're going to talk about that, where most landed in this was the 76, 75, 71s, Burgers, with Knapp, with Minwoo, with Bhatia, with all those different guys in that range, and I had none of them, but I was able to go with Cam Young and Straka as my chalkier options, but there is still no Ludwig. There is no Fitzpatrick. There is no Morikawa. There is no Scotty. There is none of those guys. So it's again, like you always say, it's not just who you play, it's who you don't play. And this is the setup of this here. And I landed on Scott, Straka, Bridgman. Like nobody was landing 79, 76, and 73. They were landing in that 71, 74, 75, 77. This kind of splits the difference on that build in a very common build type where most started with Morikawa and Siwoo. So I want to talk to you this week about roster construction, because if, the thing about the wave advantage, maybe I'm too bold on that. Like the most misunderstood, my point going back to that commenter was like, people just will say they understand it because of the results oriented setup of what ended up actually happening, but they probably won't use it to their advantage in the future. And I think we've talked a ton about this. You are a single entry player, but what people confuse is you're also a one lineup player. So like if you have one ticket in the mega, but everybody else has 19, doesn't matter, because that's what you're prepped for and ready for, even though there is a bit of a difference, right? Obviously in a single entry, when everyone only has one versus a single lineup where you have one, but a bunch of other people have 19 or 37 or whatever the number might be, that's kind of the point here. But I wanted to show, did you get a chance to look at what Giant Squid did? He's obviously a multi-time Milli Maker winner, but he had Fleetwood, Fitzpatrick, Ludwig, and it's not about not needing Cam Young. That's the interesting segment of this, but it's, I think, the overall portion. He had Straka, he had Spawn, and he had Connors. And I think a lot of people see it and say, okay, well, it's only really Spawn that was different. But what was your first thoughts in looking at the winning lineup? You nodded your head, so I feel like you've seen this before, but what were your thoughts on the winning lineup here, 540?
Yeah, I did see the winning lineup. I think it's a really solid lineup. It very clearly has, separators. It has high probability plays. It does what we say, makes a really good lineup, that balance between the guys who can really help you separate and the guys that can help preserve that advantage. What I didn't get a chance to look at was, I know he had multiple lineups, and I didn't get a chance to look at his whole portfolio, which is something that I typically like to do. I think it is a mistake to just look at the winning lineup, particularly when the person who won had multiple lineups because their strategy wasn't to make this lineup win. It was to have something in their portfolio win. And so it makes sense to look at everything they did. Now, I don't know how many lineups he did have, but
2. He had 2 lineups
okay.
in this tournament, and this is a great point you just brought up. I think it's really important to think about that. I have a deep dive on this, and we're not going to spend 35 minutes on it, so we'll keep everybody happy here. We got a lot to talk about with the Valspar, but this is obviously the point of the beginning of the show. If you're watching this on playback or replay, the timestamps are below. You could skip immediately ahead to where we start talking about the chalk lineup for Valspar and how we're going to leverage that in single entry and MME. But the review portion is where I think you can learn a lot from. And I loved your point there. If I see one, I don't just want to look at the winner, even if it is one of the best DFS players in the entire world. It's not that. It's I want to see, okay, how did they think about it knowing that they had 2? I could have had 2. I loved my lineup, and it sucked. I'll show it to you. We'll do a double whammy here. For 15th, I had Xander Matsuyama. I used the low-owned 8K guy in Shane Lowry. I went all PM AM, and I had some of the guys that were really good leverage that kind of just looked from that side of the thing as low-owned separators. Hogard, Kitayama, Mitchell. I know these guys popped in ranks. You and I looked at some of this stuff. I know you were talking about some of these options last week. So just to bring that together, it didn't work out, but this is how I would play my one lineup. It was exact same thought. If I had played that 522 lineup that won me the ticket, I would have $50,000. I'd be $50,000 richer. But going back to Giant Squid and why I think roster construction is important, I think he probably hated this lineup when the cards flipped, but I can kind of see somewhat what he did here. He had a Scotty lineup and a non-Scotty lineup. That portion in my brain is how I'm reading this. Again, I don't have Julian in front of me. He's an awesome dude, partner over at SaberSim, great guy, fun to hang out with and party and talk to. But just to note this, if he went with it with Scotty in one and not in the other, I get that angle. But then you look at what ends up happening in a Scotty lineup, and we talked about this last week, and we've talked about this all season, yourself included from day one, saying this is remember, it's not just Scotty, it's what does he do for the rest? What are your thoughts on this build? Because look at the ownership increase on all the dudes that he kind of had to land on once he went to Scotty.
Yeah, the lineup that won is the one that deserved to do really well. I'm not a big fan of this one, and we talk a bunch about like this concept of conditional ownership, and so when you see these ownerships over here, when you see 14% for Noren, 14% for Fowler, like understand that in Scotty lineups, those are probably a lot higher, and especially Noren. Noren might have been like 25% in Scotty lineup, something like that. So he really only had one separator in that lineup, and it was the cheapest and the least likely guy to actually do well in the lineup. So that one definitely was not a lineup that I would love if I had it, but it's obviously very hard to argue with the process of the guy who won the Millie. So I think we saw just how good he is at building lineups to that other one. That other one is an extremely well-built lineup, and it deserved to win.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that one. I just want to I like this Stack Seeker as well that you kind of look up just to see. And there's no affiliation here, actually 0 with Fantasy Labs. I just use it because it's easy to sort of see through and go into. But yeah, I know people see it's only 3 and 5 and 4%, but that's a lot in a tournament with only 660. 5% of the lineups had Noren in them, and 5% had Ricky in them, and that sort of thing, or close to it, 4%, whatever it was when I just pulled up. So I think that's important to consider as well. But I want to go back to his main winner, and we'll probably get at this segment in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But just to note it, I think a lot of people looked at this lineup and said, okay, kind of just had JJ, Spawn, and Connor separate for him at low ownership, but they didn't even, right? Like Spawn 68, Connor's pretty good at 71 at 84, but just noting it. To me, this is where people confuse stuff, though, is in looking for those diamonds in the rough, or like, where's the low-owned leverage, and what is the true separation? When it comes to roster construction for me, and this is where I think it's another one of the misunderstood DFS concepts, because everyone's constructing rosters, but are they focused on roster construction? There's a difference, right? We're all doing it, but are you actually thinking about it? And that's clearly, to me, here, he's thinking about it, because to me, the full separation of this lineup was playing Tommy when everyone's on either Scotty or dropping down to Morikawa. Nobody wanted Rory because of the back, and only 14% wanted Fleetwood. We talk about this all the time. Is Fleetwood higher owned on the sheet of the high ownership guys? Yeah, he's 14%. But is he really chalk when Morikawa for $500 less is 40%? That's quite the separator from Morikawa. Skipping the 9K range altogether. Go there in a second. He has 0 of them. Playing Ludwig from the 8Ks as the highest owned guy, but not having Cameron Young, for example. And again, obviously, Cam Young would have been nice. He went on to win the tournament. And then the 10, 2, and 8 matters a whole lot more when you see where everything lands, because in this tournament, as I said, the separation that he's done, if you look, Morikawa, 9K range, 43%, Siwoo, 9K range, 31%, even Henley, 9K, 27%. Then you go into the 7K range, Berger is almost 30. So that's where, again, using Connors, is Connors almost 10% owned? Sure, but he's not almost 30% owned like Daniel Berger. And so there's that thought process to it. Min Woo, Bhatia, two of the next highest owned. Wait, what are we seeing here? 71, 75, 77. 71 at 1/4 the ownership. 75, 77, 76, 74, much lower ownership. So he's kind of just bounced around the board. And so to me, people aren't looking into this enough of the original statement I've made for the longest time. It's not who you play, it's how you play them. It's literally a great separation build and not just a lineup built on separation. The separation is in the actual roster construction, not necessarily fully in the plays, but within the plays, 8% versus 28 on Berger, 14 versus 43 on Morikawa, you are still getting it. So hopefully people can understand that and see it from that angle. In a tournament with almost $5,000 to buy in and just 667 people, you can still play really good options that others agree are good options, but play them in a unique way to the field. And sometimes it's more important to look at that than it is what all the models and the stats and the different things tell you. And obviously you can combine that all together and make for some really good lineups. Any further thoughts on the giant squid stuff here from you, Alex, just on this build?
Yeah, not on this build. Go back to the Scotty build for a second. I went in and found the actual numbers here. So
yeah, perfect.
I talked about
the
conditional
too, by the way.
ownership.
I guarantee you hated that.
What'd you say?
I sorry to cut you off. So, and the other thing about it was duped too. I guarantee you hated that. Like he was thinking like maybe I had something with it, but even if it had been the one, it was a full on chop, which I get other people be like, well, $500,000 is nothing to, say something bad about. But at the same time, it's like, that's not what he's looking for when he's building this.
Well, so that's actually like an awesome point. So right off the bat, let's talk about like how a lineup like this gets duped when it has 4 guys under 20%, and one at like 3%. The answer is because as soon as you click Scotty, you're like funneled into this much smaller player pool that everyone has to choose from, which is why these conditional ownerships get higher. And so I just ran the numbers. Noren was 50% more owned than 50% more owned with Scotty than without Scotty. So in this case, like, he's 15% owned basically. So he's 22.5% owned in Scotty lineups, something like that. And that was pretty much true across all contest types. It was true in the Mega Milli. It was true in the really small single entry with only 277 people. It exists everywhere because it's not just like, it's not like it's just some psychological effect of, oh, if I'm clicking Scotty, I'm more likely to click Noren. No, it's that you're literally funneled into this much smaller player pool. You only have so many options. Of course, those guys are going to then be higher owned, but that means when you're looking at this lineup and saying like, okay, I've got 4 guys under 15%. There's a good chance I won't be duped, or there's a good chance, any of these guys can be separators. No, they can't, because what you need to have this lineup to be great is for Scotty to, number one, be great. But if Scotty's now helping you to get close to the top of the leaderboard, you're now competing with other people who have Scotty and other people who are choosing from this exact same, much smaller, much, shrunken player pool. And so the 15% are 25%. The 10% is 15 to 20, things like that. And so it's just a lot harder to separate within these Scotty lineups.
Yeah, I think this is a key point, and even Sean brings it up here. So again, this is the true definition of it's not who you play, it's how you play them. It's being cognizant of what these plays mean. Like when you're putting something together, think about that next step. If you think Scotty lineups are going to land more with this on a certain week or whatever you're looking at, the Fitzpatrick lineups, and that's why we talk shortly about Valspar when we get to Fitzpatrick and Smotherman or whatever it ends up being. Like, not only will they both be popular, they'll be very popular together because those lineups just start to blend and make sense. To others out there doing tout shows and pick shows and telling you these are great plays and picks, they're not even thinking about any of the stuff that we're talking about. So of course it seems, and when you're, I know people that are sitting at work on lunch break or at the gym on the treadmill, walking or running, whatever, and they're putting together lineups like, well, I heard Fitzpatrick sounds pretty good to me. Smotherman sounds pretty good to me. Should just throw these guys together. If you're thinking that, so is everybody else. But the fact that they just mesh so easily together is what makes that very common. And then you're not only not getting separation in the lineup, you're not getting separation in the roster construction, which is what we just went through with this build here that I showed you for Giant Squid.
So yeah, I just again just brought this up. I've got a sheet that does all my conditional ownership for me. So all I have to do is plug in names. But so this is a great question, and it's exactly right. So let's compare Scotty with Noren to Oberg with Noren. In the single entry, Oberg was 33.94%. Scotty was 16.97%. So we're talking about literally double, like exactly double the amount of lineups included Oberg than the lineups that included Scotty. And yet 2.9% of lineups had the combination of Scotty and Noren. 3.2% had the combination of Oberg and Noren. So you almost had the exact same combinatorial ownership for Oberg and Noren as Scotty and Noren, despite the fact that Scotty was used half as often as Oberg. So exactly right. That's what we're talking about with conditional ownership. The conditional ownership for Oberg was a lot lower with Noren than his overall ownership, and the conditional ownership, or I should say it the other way around. The conditional ownership for Noren with Oberg was a lot less than the conditional ownership of Noren with Scotty. And so when you're using someone like Noren, it makes sense to use him in a contrarian way. Even if he's one of the more popular options, you can use him in a contrarian way and still then have him be a little bit of a separator if your other guys hit, right? If Oberg ends up being in contention the way he was and Scotty doesn't play well, now it doesn't matter how owned Noren is in Scotty lineups because those lineups are already dead. You've already beaten those lineups because because Oberg is outperforming Scotty so significantly, and now the rest of your lineup is stronger. So you're only competing now with the other Oberg lineups, the other more balanced builds, not the Scotty builds, and there Noren's lower owned and can potentially be a separator for you.
Yeah, I'm going to round this segment out in the next 2 minutes. I just want to clear up one other thing, too. I want to note for people, because another thing, so Brandon Adams, one of the better players across all sports, but one of the best players out there, and just extremely sharp guy across all categories, industries, whatever you want to say. Awesome dude. So look at him. He came in second and 22nd and 27th, 31st. And so I spent some time on this. I'm not going to go into a heavy deep dive here. This is kind of what we do over in Mastermind and things like that, but just noting it in some of the mentorship classes that I've gone through with people and talking about it. But if you see him, this one lineup is great. Like 8, 8, 8, 8, 7, 7, 5. Like, talk about a way to play Ludwig and Minwoo differently. It's like, man, nobody's starting with Fitz and going that ultra balanced, and it still spent the money. It still had the higher ownership. That's pretty cool, pretty different build, like to look at it. But then you look, he did the Xander Matsuyama thing. Of course, these are all the best lineups. I'm just showing you right now to start off. He did a 3-8K guy thing with Bobby Mack and Cantlay. Like, if you think about having a portfolio and building to actually win this tournament, he did the Hovland Fleetwood thing where he kind of skipped over the Henley, Siwoos, and Morikawas and used the guys above and below. And I'm not gonna go through them all. There's a couple others, starting with the balanced build again with Henley, the Xander Matsuyama again, the Fleetwood, then 3 8Ks with no Cam Young or Fitz. So if you see how he played it, but then people would say, well, man, must be nice to somehow end up just completely fading Morikawa on a 43% withdrawal, right? Morikawa. He didn't. Yeah. He played a portfolio of lineups and played them accordingly. And I'm not going to go into this in deep dive, but like Sungjae, Hideki with Xander in your Morikawa lineups, like even in his Morikawas, he played it differently. And so just going to note, if you guys got time on your hands or you're looking to actually get better at PGA DFS, hopefully this show is helping you do that. That's our number one goal here, but also to go back and see the stuff that we're looking at from players that we know are strong players, and then seeing, okay, how do they do it? And again, everything that Brandon Adams did here is applicable in a $3.20 max. It's, again, field size, much different, certainly, but I'm saying the concepts and the thoughts of it. And it's not just about the picks and the plays. It's about the roster construction as a whole and finding yourself a way to separate, even if you are in a bit of a chalkier type build or a more common type build, right? You're building it a little bit of a different way and having separators put in there and stuff. He's got some that are a little more chalky than others in the Morikawa ones. But if you look at those top sort of 10 lineups that he had, they were all completely different. And it's not just lucky because he faded Morikawa. He actually had 50%. I think if you go here, Brandon Adams, his exposure, 75% Ludwig, almost 60% Cantlay. The guy, did what? Who knows? Not much. He had 50% Morikawa over the field and still made out okay on the week, 184,000 in profit. And that's versus also what he won in satellite entries, right? I'm sure he won money on those based on getting in on tickets and stuff like that too. So love these types of conversations, Alex. I think it's going to be a big thing moving forward. If you guys like stuff like this and you want to get in at Ship It Nation, you guys can go check it out, shipitnation.com. Click Winner's Circle, see how you can find your membership for free, or join the nation. We've got all the single sport offerings as well. All right, let's get to the Valspar, and let's talk first, I think, about just weather and course fit. And if you think course fit is more, it's not really about waves and things like that. We talked through that a ton last week, but anything you want to add on weather, and then anything you want to talk about on course fit, because I think that's where you're going to shine this week on this course. There's definitely some good stuff I know you found.
Yeah, there's not a ton weather-wise that I think is worth noting. I think it's going to be more relevant for Showdown than the main slate, because we have a very interesting balance here where the mornings look like they're going to be quite chilly, and you get a north wind and very cool temps, like low 50s to start, especially tomorrow. That can lead to some very difficult conditions where even if the wind does pick up a little bit as the day goes on, it could end up playing tougher in the morning. I think we'll learn a lot from Thursday in terms of how it's going to play Friday, but the weather looks very similar Thursday as to Friday. So we should expect similar scoring conditions. Whatever difference there is between early and late scoring is probably going to carry over into Friday. So no real wave advantage anywhere. To the course fit point, this is a really interesting golf course because it does test guys in a pretty unique way. We have a big spike in approach play predictive value and a big spike in putting predictive value, less than usual in both distance and accuracy off the tee. And so this is actually a pretty easy course fit model to understand intuitively. Like sometimes we see, hey, this skill set really, really pops, and I can't totally explain why that is. This one I think is really easy. Both aspects of driving are less important because there are a couple key holes where, number one, guys are just taking iron off the tee. And so the tee shot itself is about iron skill and not driving skill. But then also we get 5 par 3s here. So you're automatically getting one additional approach play from level playing ground to the field and one fewer drive where you can, really separate from the field. So that part's really easy to understand. And then I think the putting spike is also pretty easy to understand because it's a difficult golf course where you're going to have to make putts to make birdies. You're also going to have to make a lot of putts to save pars. And so the most predictive range of putting is probably somewhere between like 5 and 15 feet. And you're going to get a lot of putts from that range, both for birdie and par this week, which is a little bit different than some other courses where a lot of the birdies come from tap-ins and a lot of the par saves come from, 2 putts from 30 feet where there's no stress on the par putt. So more putts from the predictive range leads to a spike in putting predictive value.
Yeah, I think one thing, people like to bring up when it comes to putting, obviously we talk about it a lot more in Showdown, right? People bring it up all the time in PGA Showdown saying like, hey, so-and-so had a great round on approach. He just couldn't find it with the putter. Got to move back to him here. Is there anything else you can sort of lean on when you're discussing putting, just about how people can, because like what people will look at is obviously just like currently putting stats, like who's a good putter, but those players can have bad weeks putting and somebody else can just pop, or, if guys that, at this type of tournament, especially with the greens and the way things are, that's sort of like it's hard to make birdies. So when you make putts, I mean, obviously anything you make is going to be pretty valid and look good on the stat sheet. So is there anything more you can add to the putting conversation?
Yeah, I think putting's a very kind of almost fun modeling discussion because it touches on a lot of like key mathematical points. So the first one is just like, if you are just purely trying to model putting and you want the most predictive model possible, where your only goal is to predict the strokes gained putting for this player in the next event, you need a pretty large sample. You can't be looking at the last 3 events or the last 2 events or anything like that. You need something like, minimum last 44 rounds. What we use is like a decay weighted 365 day look back, where I think we're probably using like last 5 years. And so every 365 days, the weight of that event doubles as you get closer and closer to quote unquote recent form. So it's a really, really massive sample that you need to maximize putting. What we can then do is just people who are doing our own research and looking to try and get even better than the model is to look at what the player has done in the most predictive ranges lately. Because essentially the reason why putting is so difficult in terms of like finding signal from recent form is that what we're measuring, how many putts went in compared to how many should have gone in, is not is not reflective of the actual skill, which is how well is he hitting his line? How well is, his, how dialed is his speed on the greens? How well is he aligning every single putt? We don't get those answers from the actual results. We can potentially get those answers from watching and just seeing like, man, every single putt he's missed today really looked like it should have gone in. I'm going to play him next round in Showdown because I think they're going to fall. That's a risky type of analysis because you're going to be wrong quite often because putting is so volatile, but it also can sometimes, really pay off. But I think the other thing to look at is like, let's take a look at Xander, for example. In the final round, you can see that he gained a lot of strokes. And importantly, he gained a lot of strokes because he made putts that he should make. So 15, 16, 17, all were very good putts that he could have missed, but they're not easy putts. He made those. He made a much longer one on 18, so gained 0.85 strokes on that one, made a bomb on number 6 to save par, like throw that out the window. But that to me is an indication of someone who was rolling the ball better that day than in previous days where, let's see, I think it was day 2, he made bombs on 1, 4, and 8. So he gained basically the same amount of strokes on day 2 as he did day 4. But day 1, all of the gains came from bombs that you're not going to count on him making the next day. In day 4, he made a handful of putts that are just much more that are just much better indicators that he was actually putting the ball well, and that type of putting will continue. So it's a bit of an inexact science. There's a bit of like almost artistry to analyzing putting, but I think my biggest point here is like, if you want to just rely on models and rely on numbers, you need large samples. You can't be looking at, okay, this guy has gained strokes putting in 3 straight events and therefore he's going to be good. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Speaking of Xander, a couple quick notes. One, insane how well he finished. There was even a moment there when those guys still had to ride through 15, 16, 17, 18. You're like, whoa, Xander's in the clubhouse right now. And you could see his odds dropping to like, even I think it was got his, 12-1 I saw at one point. It was like once he was in there, like maybe these guys falter down the stretch. But for how bad he played on Saturday, Sunday, from what it looked like to how it actually, again, the putter helps, but he should make putts. He's Xander, he can do that. So things like that kind of worked in his favor. Those irons and everything looked quite off at times over Saturday, Sunday. But a secondary note on him relating to the Valspar, I did see one of his interview questions. It was just a tidbit, but just noting it. He said that it's nice to have greens that are actually green. They've had some water, coming in, things like that, coming into the week where we've got some rain. So maybe we can hole some of these putts this time around. And again, like you said, he had some putts that he hold for sure, but this is like for everybody. So when people are saying, well, this person sucks at putting or this person sucks at putting, it could be a very small number or a small sample or whatever that might be, but there's a chance you could find some of those guys making some putts this week. So again, why I'm going to be looking at, from standard, perspective of roster construction, what the field's doing. So let's use that as a segue to get into it. We had the Akshay conversation off the top. I think it just leads to more Fitzpatrick, but now I think you do see people get to a little bit more Hovland, a little bit more Xander, a little bit more Bridgman, who was already getting the ownership piled onto him there. So how do you sort of see this playing out, and what does the chalk build down the board from, Fitz down, however you want to look at this? I think it's pretty clear. What does that look like to you? And then anything else that you see from the Akshay Bhatia withdrawal fallout? Bhatia.
So if we think all the way back to last year, one of my favorite examples of how we can use conditional ownership to our advantage came from last year's Scottish Open. And interestingly, Fitzpatrick was kind of the major chalk. And there were 2 guys around him that were very clear pivots. There was Ryan Fox and Harry Hall. And what we ended up seeing was there's a very clear pattern that the field views some guys as pivots off of a certain player, or they play that certain player, and there's not a lot of combining the two. And so what we saw that week at the Scottish was people used Hall and Fox together significantly more often than they used either of them with Fitzpatrick. So both of those guys were pivots off of Fitz. The combination of the 2 pivots was significantly higher owned than using the chalk with one of his pivots. We had the exact same dynamic shaping up here where both Akshay and Bridgman were clear pivots off of Fitzpatrick. So we might have been able to get a really, really nice combinatorial ownership discount on Fitz plus Akshay or Fitz plus Bridgman. I think that's probably out the window now because it's now just Fitz and Bridgman. I think all the guys around them are going to get a little bit more ownership. So Hovland will probably get 2 to 3 more, percentage points of ownership. Same for JT and Cantlay and Spieth, maybe even Griffin and Brooks Koepka. But I think we're mostly just going to see a lot of that Akshay ownership go right to Bridgman. Why? Because so much of the Akshay ownership, like the Bridgman ownership, is this is my favorite play other than Matt Fitzpatrick. It's my favorite way to pivot off of Fitzpatrick. And those people are probably still thinking, I want to pivot off of Fitzpatrick. And now the next most likely guy that they go to is Bridgman. So I think the biggest thing we're going to see is Bridgman could end up pushing 30, 35% instead of the 22% that we had him projected at previously in single entries.
Yeah, stay tuned to the end. My Leverage Lane will cover some more on this as well. We did get some breaking news too. Rory's Masters dinner menu came out. Real quick. People love the food here. Listen to these appies, man. Rock shrimp tempura with a creamy spicy sauce, bacon wrapped dates, and then he's got grilled elk sliders with a caramelized onion jam and a roasted garlic aioli. Get yourself a yellowfin tuna carpaccio for the first course, a Wagyu filet mignon for the main course or seared salmon, and then a sticky toffee pudding for the dessert. That's pretty interesting. Roy's doing it big there. So congrats to him on a Grand Slam dinner. That's not the Denny's Grand Slam. I'll tell you what, that's a good one.
That peach and ricotta flatbread, that
nice.
Sounds delicious.
I skipped that, but it's actually incredible. And then once I saw goat cheese in the bacon wrapped dates, I was much higher on moving it up because it's the peach and ricotta flatbread with balsamic hot honey and basil. That is nice right there. I love that. So
if you won a green jacket, what would be the one thing you had to put in yours?
Man, that's a good question. I'm a big beef short ribs guy. So I'm thinking I would go to short ribs instead of the classic like strip loin or whatever. I might go to a T-bone though, get a little T-bone action there. So definitely would be beef though. Beef would be one of the main courses.
For me, I would honor Augusta by putting a chicken pimento cheese sandwich on that list, because if for anyone who hasn't been in the Masters, maybe you're going for the first time, maybe you've already gone before, but you didn't do this. But one of the best parts of the experience is that they have these like incredibly cheap, menu items that you just go in, you get it. It takes 2 minutes to go through the line and it costs like $2.50 a sandwich or something like that. And they have a very famous, just like a plain chicken biscuit. And then they have a very famous, just plain pimento cheese sandwich. There's nothing but pimento cheese in between the bread. The move is to get them both, take out the piece of chicken from the biscuit, put it inside of the pimento cheese sandwich, and it becomes the most delicious thing that you'll ever eat for $4. So
could you get like an elevated main that includes all of that, but like it's like a chicken stuffed breast with the pimento and then like elevate everything around it versus throwing the sandwich on there? That's what I would think, but it's hilarious you went that route.
No, that's what I would want the sandwich. I would want to be as true to the Augusta experience as possible. I could have other courses that are much more upscale and fitting for the Masters dinner, but that one would have to be on there just in its truest form.
We'll get back to the golf in just 1 second, but you should know me by now, Stat. Canada, nothing when it comes to like food. It's like my stuff for hockey and all that stuff. Like we'll watch some Olympic hockey. We'll watch the Four Nations, that type of stuff, but there's no poutine going on the menu. That's like the most basic shit you can get. It's like a Canadian tradition. If you haven't tried it, try it. It's not that good. So going back to the golf, I do think you nailed the Bridgman piece there. People already liked him anyway. And what is going to happen, I think too, I got to note this as well. Fitzpatrick, which we'll get to what the actual lineup looks like in a second. It's still going to start with Fitz, I think, but you could even see like Fitz and Bridgman now go together. If people are looking to go that route, I still think the 8K range has some guys that are pretty popular there. But in 1 second, the other note is when people don't like Fitzpatrick, once they find out that everyone starts to hate on him because of his ownership, then they think Bridgman is the good option, or they say, or I'm just going to go up to Xander. And I think this is another like just grand scheme overview point about the Xander conversation. He was already getting ownership, by the way, like 20-ish%, something a little more, whatever you ended up getting him at. But one thing that's very common in PGA DFS that kind of plays into almost every week, except maybe the certain randoms, is if there is any type of upper 6K range, well, it never gets super popular. And while people aren't that high on it, what does happen is as the week goes on, people get higher on it. So now when you have a perfect storm of Akshay, WD. They already like Xander. If they're not going down to Fitz and Bridgman, they'll go up to Xander. It doesn't, I mean, maybe it's Hovland for you. Hovland could open up there now for you or something like that. But just to note it, I think people will be even more comfortable with Xander now when they see down in the lower sevens and upper sixes all the names like Novak and Brennan and Michael Kim and Lee Hodges and Eric Cole and McCarthy and Hoey and all those guys now fit a Xander lineup. They already did, by the way. But now that people kind of have to move it around, it's likely that somebody could say, okay, well, I heard Smotherman's going to be popular. Let me just take him down to, I'm just making this up on the spot, but exact money of like, who would it be? He's 74. Let's say you take him down to a Kanaya or something like that, or whatever, someone who still be lower owned, but it's now they get to have Xander up top or something like that. So I just see that stuff happen so often, and it just opens up more as the week goes on. Let's talk about that chalk build though.
Real quick, Tim, I've got one more point here on where to expect the Akshay ownership to go. The last question that I think people should be thinking through when they're trying to answer this question for themselves is, who was on Akshay initially, right? We all have our own processes. We all have our own things that we care a little bit more about than other things. So, some people are all about recent form. Some people, like myself, are more about long-term baselines, things of that nature. So who is on Akshay? People who really care about recent form, people who want to play guys who have already shown them this year that they can contend, they can win, they can play a lot of really good golf. They're very clearly in form. So, that type of person is much more likely to go to a Bridgman than a Patrick Cantlay. That type of person is much more likely to go to Sahith Theegala or Rio Hisatsune rather than, JJ Spawn or Keegan Bradley or Nick Taylor, someone like that. So that's, I think, the final point. And so when you're thinking about, okay, how can I adjust differently than everyone else? If you were somebody on Akshay and you're saying, okay, I don't get to play Akshay anymore, how can I make sure that I don't just make the same swap that everyone else is making? I think that's the answer is figure out, what type of pivot everyone else is going to make who's in your position, and then try and pivot in a different way. Try and go to somebody else that most people aren't going to say, oh, you know what, this guy actually is a good pivot off of Akshay, because they never initially would have gone to him.
I love that call out. Actually, really unique way to think of it. And it seems obvious, but it's one that most would overlook, is what you said. Is like, it's so automatic to say, if I was in on Akshay, it's because of that form. Bridgman and Fitzpatrick fit it perfectly. And then Xander has shown up pretty much here in the past. Obviously, Hovland, last year's winner, like, it's all right there for you. But I think people are clearly going more the recent form route than the historic route. But even like a guy like Hovland could fit it, but I don't think they'll click it. But like, he won last year, he's on a 13th run, but neither of those really popped at a Siggy and another big one in the Players. And so it's like, maybe he's not as common where people would go to like a Xander, and realistically Hovland could be the better option there. So little things like that are ways to stand out and get different and just find your unique build. What are you seeing as the common build? If we're talking like a single entry this week that people will land on most commonly that starts with Fitz, I see a couple things that I wanted to bring up and then get your take. One is the Smotherman conversation.
Yep.
Looks like he's 3x owned pretty much everyone that's the exact same around him. By the way, this is not the show for it because it's Leverage Lane, not Narrative Street. This guy knows that his wife is due on Monday. People have heard about the Smotherman baby, on the way, etc. It's going to be born on Monday or due on Monday. First of all, that doesn't mean it's going to be born on Monday. Could be 2 weeks late for all we know. Second of all, he knows that, and he's still at the tournament. Third of all, he could leave. But like, the way people just move off it, that's like the worst reason to move off of him, in my opinion. I think the best reason to move off of him, if you're doing it, is because he's 3x owned 30 guys around him that basically all project very similar on median projection and all have same ceiling or more. But go ahead and talk to me about this, because I see Smotherman. And then the one last thing I want to note was just that 8K range factor of at least Sahith and Rio, of two guys there that I think are popping a little bit, but there is other dudes in there where I think people are not just playing the 8K guy this week. And then they also, recency bias factor here. What worked last week? Oh, if you had Fitz and Ludwig and Cam Young, they're all in the 8K range. Okay. Even JT was in the 8K range last week. So I think people see that too, and some of that carries over as well, but I'll get your thoughts.
Yeah. So in terms of where people are going, I'm actually going to start this conversation in a very unique way. And that is to start with what people are not doing. we don't have anybody under $7,400 projected for double-digit ownership, and we don't have anyone even coming close to double-digit ownership in single entries below $7,400. There's a massive, massive, massive tier break when you go from McGreevy, Smotherman, and Meisner down. So those three are all going to be very popular, especially Smotherman. At the moment, we still have Smotherman projected for 26% and McGreevy and Meisner both at 15%. This is another instance where it wouldn't shock me if McGreevy and Meisner end up being in line or even a touch higher than Smotherman, just because it does seem like the entire industry is recognizing Smotherman as the chalk, and not the entire industry is recognizing McGreevy and Meisner. So there might be enough people who think, "Ooh, I'm getting a really nice sneaky pivot here with McGreevy or Meisner." And then you realize, oh crap, no, I was not sneaky at all. That's what everyone was thinking. And maybe
I was just going to add quickly there.
Well.
That was Harris English last week. So good call out on this, because that's the exact exist. So last week, everyone thought, well, if it's Knapp and if it's Berger down below and if it's Bhatia and those guys and all there, Bhatia, I keep screwing up the name, just noting it, but just saying it, like if it's those guys in that range, people think they find the next sneaky guy. And then it turns out, and like Toots McBoots DFS there says, could happen where it's little things like that, where it's like, okay, he loses a little bit, but then it lands right onto the other two that others are currently just talking about, but they're secretly clicking them, and sometimes more than some other. Not to cut you off, but go ahead. I think that was a really good point. Wanted to bring
we saw it in a huge way at the opening week this season at the Sony Open, when Rico Hoey was projected as major chalk. Gerard was projected as like the secondary chalk to Hoey. Gerard ended up massive chalk, and Hoey ended up slipping through the cracks a little bit because everyone was like, oh my God, I don't want to play Hoey at this massive ownership. We might get the same sort of effect here with Smotherman, where is anyone going to be like very confidently, energetically, enthusiastically playing a 26% Smotherman? Now, we're projecting higher than most of the field, as we often do in our single entry, but even if it's 15 to 20%, is anyone like really enthusiastic about a 20% Smotherman who might have to miss the weekend because his wife goes into labor? That seems a little bit iffy. So that's an ownership projection that really could change for us in our final adjustment tonight. But for the rest of the common build, I think the main point that I'm trying to make with the fact that there's very little ownership concentrating anywhere under 7,400 is a lot of lineups are going to try to make 7,400 the weak link, the lowest spot in the lineup, which obviously then means a more balanced build. So I can see a lot of lineups, as you said, starting with Fitzpatrick, starting with Bridgman, and then trying to hit the 8K range hard and the 7K range hard, where maybe they have like, Bridgman, Hisatsune, Thigala, Connors, and then they go to McGreevy and Meisner or something like that, or Smotherman and Pearson Cootie, things of that nature. So I think that's the type of build that we're going to see a ton, and that will keep Xander's ownership in check a little bit, but that can also pretty easily just be, Xander instead of Bridgman or Fitzpatrick, and then you just take one of those 8K guys and you make them a low 8K guy or a high 7K guy. So it's not like it's a big giant challenge to get to Xander the way it's been a big challenge to get to Scotty in the past few weeks.
And then, so with that 8K range there, like I could see it. I don't have it exactly in front of me right now, but like basically Fitzpatrick, Thigala, Rio, Smotherman, pick one, if not multiples of those other guys in there. But I mean, kind of looks like a 1-9-2-8-3-7s type of situation.
Yeah, I think that would be my main guess. And then let's see, can we also, how does that change? So if we put Fitzpatrick and Bridgman in together, we're left with 7,650. So that could be, 2 9K guys, 3 7s, and 1 8 instead. So there are multiple variations, but I think regardless, most lineups are going to be 7Ks and 9Ks or 8Ks, and not a whole lot of Hovland and Schauffele, and then not a whole lot of 6K guys.
Yeah, I wonder if people like just thinking about Pendrith a little bit there, but it looks like they kind of want to get up to it's if you can get to Rio in there. I think it's, even if you put like Smotherman in one of the other two, you kind of land in that $7,200 range. Who do you have super popular down there right now? And again, no one's super popular, but anybody popping a little bit more than others in the 71, 72 range that you think could stand out?
Not really. I mean, let's see, is So John Perry like 7% at 7,300, and then there are a couple at 5%. Michael Brennan 7%, and that feels maybe a touch high to me, just because this is not the course for his skill set. But yeah,
So then I would say this, another thing that I see is like Homa and Clark. And so like the build that I'm seeing too that also fits is if you have something like Fitzpatrick, Thigala, Rio, pick two of the McGreevy, Meisner, and Smotherman, and it lands you in the 8K range. And if you go up one and down one, it'd be like Aaron Rye or McCarty or Smalley or Bez. And if you go up, it could be like Wyndham, Homa, Rasmus, like in that range. So that kind of build does stand out more. And then obviously if you say, okay, then I just won't play Fitzpatrick, I'll play Bridgman instead, it gets you like a little bit more money, but you do still end up on 2 to 3 8K guys or the upper 7K range. But right now it looks like the upper 7 range. So if you're talking about guys like McCarty, Smalley, Bez, Cootie, Rogers, Bjorn Olesen, those guys, they look a lot less owned than that mid $7,400, $7,500 range. And then, of course, once you go 7,300 and below, when you've got guys like Glover and Sung Jae, Mackenzie Hughes, Tom Kim, Rico, Kevin Roy, McCarthy, all those guys not really getting played. And then the upper 6s do actually have, I don't know, 10 to 12 guys that are going to project pretty solid or similar to the lower 7s. So if you can get that route, I think that's another solid way to go as well. Anything else on the common build that you want to cover there?
Yeah, the more we've talked through this, the more I think I need to really boost the ownership, I should say, of this like $8,600 to $9,100 range, let's say, even $9,000. I think Hisatsune, Spawn, Thigala, Nikolai, and Connors are going to end up soaking up a lot of that Akshay ownership, simply because anyone who, again, like let's think through someone who is playing Akshay. They're playing Akshay largely because they have a lot of conviction on him. They chose Akshay already over Bridgman or Fitzpatrick or Hovland. They don't necessarily want to pivot to somebody, so they're going to go to someone else that lets them then make a 2v2 instead of a 1v1. And so I think we'll see a lot of that Akshay ownership go to Bridgman, and then we'll see a lot of that Akshay ownership go to Connors, Nikolai, Thigala, Spawn, Hisatsune. And in those instances, they then get to upgrade the weak link of their lineup to someone that they feel more confident about, and they're going to be happier with that 2v2 than any 1v1 that they can find. And so I think all of that group, Hisatsune, Spawn, Thigala, Nikolai, Connors, I need to really up their ownership for this last run.
And this fits as well to my man Timmy Dublin, but I think, like, again, you'll just see more 9K, multiple 8Ks. Again, the recency bias factor is huge as well, but this fits fine. But fits fine, get it. Matt Fitzpatrick is going to be very popular in those. If there is going to be 2 9Ks, most certainly Matt is going to be one of them. So anything else on leveraging it? I know, like, when I get to my leverage lane, I'm going to talk a ton of different ways that I think you could do it. And I've got one thing in particular, but just some of the builds and stuff that we talked about, kind of like those pockets and using them, obviously link to different styles of builds that you can do on this slate, like skipping the 8K range, skipping the 9Ks, using a guy above and going into the 9s. I think more often than not, you're seeing people fade the 6K range entirely. I think this week you could play 2 to 3 of them quite easily. Like it's very possible. And there's just not a ton of difference between the lower 7s and the upper 6s alone. And on top of the fact of what could be the outcome of guys like Smotherman and McGreevy and those guys, especially if they're going to be chalk, where could be that as well. And then I think the other interesting thing would just be like a really go back to Brandon Adams from last week, is like, if people are going to commit to that mid 8K range, are they going to overcommit to it? Probably not. And you're, now that you've got all the options in the world, are people really going to want to fade Xander and Hovland and, Cantlay, Griffin on top of the main guys in Bridgman and Fitz and those other guys that we talked about? So, just some of the other thoughts there. Do you have anything else you want to add for leveraging the common build?
Honestly, I don't want to talk too much about leveraging the common build yet, because that is my leverage lane. So we'll get there when we get there. But the last thing I'll say is I actually also think one thing we didn't say is going to be somewhat popular. We're going to see some 4 8K to 7Ks, no 9 or 10s, because that whole range, like I just mentioned, Connors, Nikolai, Thigala, Satsune, Spawn, it's very easy to start a lineup with 4 of those 5. And then that leaves you exactly with 7,400 left or 7,500 left or 76, something like that. And so that puts us right into that really chalky 7K range as well.
Yeah, if you're starting with Connors in that at 9K flat, again, you'll be really, if you land on the exact two $7,400, $7,500 guys, it's going to be a bad lineup overall.
Yep.
But it depends on your field size and your buy-in amount. If you're in something like a 3180 with 100 people, I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying, like, I get how that would still be quite different than what the field's doing. But remember, whoever, if even if it's only 5 people in that tournament that roll to this type of build, you're probably very close to those 5 people. So you didn't really exit. You know, what we always talk about, like everyone starts in one room and then you're trying to exit to the final room, the final boss where all the money lands. It's like you'd still be going with a crew along that way, to Alex's point, of many people that are going to land on that similar build. So I would look to get different in other ways. It sounds like both of us have that covered when we get to leverage lane at the end, our lanes for the week. Let's talk quickly about one and done. We didn't hit it hard on the show last week. We ended up texting afterwards and rolled out Scotty. Our thought process being, like, if other people are going to these other options and get a good Scotty week out of it, obviously it is still the most amount of money. Why not? It's not a segmented version or anything like that. Any extra thoughts on the Scotty conversation quickly, and then what we want to do for this week in one and done, or how we're seeing it?
I thought it was a smart move. It just didn't work out. One and done has been really rough for me so far this year, for us so far this year. And we still have plenty of time, but we got to start making some better plays.
Hey, can I add to that? This is a good one, actually. I sent this in our Discord today. Maybe I'll throw it over in the Blick Discord as well. I thought it was really interesting, and it's really not specific to the one and done you're in. I know for sure that people look at it from, like, Mayo's one and done is different than the Splash one that Rick runs, because it's segments. So, like I was going to say, in my Rick Run Good ones, I didn't use Scotty or Rory last week because it was the last tournament of the segment, of the first segment, and I was so dead on that segment. Why would I bury a good option? Now I could have Scotty and Rory in the same segment somewhere along those lines, right? So I just want to see this. Just 1 second here. I have it posted. I just got to go back 1 or 2 messages and find it. So anyway, Rick had posted this out earlier in the season, and I'd saved it. I was, try and give people some good motivation, Alex, along the way as much as we can. I think mindset is a huge thing. You know it from playing professional golf. It matters in DFS as well. If you have a bad mindset and you're just chasing into the weekend in showdown contests, you're probably going with a lazy approach. Now, I know you could still win money, but you're probably not putting in the same amount of effort. You lost a 6 out of 6, turned into a 5 of 6 at the end, thanks to Kitayama or Lowry or some loser that you played. And you're like, damn, I had both of them, by the way, in my mega. So you don't always, put good money behind, good money behind the money that you entered. It's bad money you're now putting in. But Rick had posted this for one and done. Last year, the user that won the 50K and earned 24 million plus didn't look that crazy. He said, I admit I was expecting to see 15 winners and countless 6-figure paydays, but that was not in fact the case. And I'm ad-libbing here, but some of it just to clear up the time frame and speed it up. But he says he actually was below average for the first 1/3 of the season. In fact, he'd earned just under 1 million heading into the Masters. He had like no money on the go. He gets the winner at the Masters, the winner at the RBC Heritage, the winner at the Truist, the winner at the Memorial, and the winner at the Travelers. So in about the next 10 events, he finds 5 winners. And I know this is like, outlandish. Some people, oh, that must be nice, found 5 winners. But just showing you're not actually dead because of how much these signature events and majors matter. After that, what's crazy, this guy still won by $2.5 million. That was the first place total amount. He had a 170, a 90, a 120. Fitzpatrick did get him 730, but then he got a 0, a 281, and a 500 to end. Like, he didn't even have any good scores to end out the season either, and he still won by $2.5 million. So it really is this one. So you're telling me there's a chance. And don't forget my friend Kevin Garnett. Anything is possible. And you check it out there. Like that is the case where he had nothing going on in the beginning, nothing going on at the end. But with how many signature events we have still, I know they were kind of hoping to get away from those. Sounds like Roll App is going to move the needle in the right direction here. But just noting that with the majors, that's where the money lies. And if you can pick 5 winners out of those, you can be in really good shape. That's like $20 million just on 5 winners, 16 million-ish on 4 winners. So any extra thoughts just on that, but not dead yet is the point.
Yeah. By the way, I loved everything that Rollup had to say. So I think he's going to be like a massive blessing for the tour. And when I first heard about like this condensed schedule and they're trying to go to this quote unquote scarcity model, I was pretty concerned. I love every single change that I'm hearing about. So that's all really, really cool. And I can't wait to get to that new schedule, because I think it's going to be significantly better than what we have right now. And in terms of one and done, honestly, the changes are going to be amazing for one and done, because the issue with one and done right now is the signature events, the players, the majors, they're kind of all that matter. Like weeks like this, they're very fun weeks. They have the potential to be really fun from like a game theory standpoint, because there are so many fewer great players. And so, you potentially can get like way off the board with someone down the line and take a chance on being way ahead of the curve on an up and coming player in a way that you can't really do in signature events, because you're just sacrificing too much. But that doesn't really help you here, because you're not, the potential gain just isn't that high, because the most you can win is like, the equivalent of a 4th place finish in a signature event. So it's, these kinds of weeks are frustrating from a one and done standpoint. I think the main thing is, just because we're further along in the season doesn't change the fact that we still probably want to play a lot of these guys in signature events. And so I still want to make sure that I'm not, burning Xander or Hovland or Fitzpatrick. I almost think you can throw Bridgman in that. Bridgman might be like the best player that I'm willing to play this week. It's a really kind of tough decision. And then the other point is, we're very much at the part of the season where everyone out there should kind of be making their own one and done decisions based on where you're sitting, the structure of your contests. As you just mentioned, I think one of the main points to make is, like, you got to know whether or not your contest has segments or not, because you should be really trying to I'm in like a pretty high stakes one and done with a good buddy of mine who's in my Discord, and we were doing poorly. So like we already have it planned that we're going to spend one of our segments on Scotty, Rory, Schauffele, and either Rahm or Bryson, like all together. That's going to be the full segment. And obviously, like, we wouldn't have done that if we were in position to win the first segment by using Scotty or Rory there. So we're at the point of the season where I think there's almost a ceiling to how helpful we can be when talking about specific players in the one and done selections, and more, we just want to be talking about, like, these are the kind of variables that you should be thinking about when making your decision.
Yeah, you just nailed a point there. And I think people are like, again, it's not DFS, and like we could be splitting up the segment money, but that still pay, like, the segment can be winning, like whatever it is. If you're in for $200 or something in your segment, or $1,000 and your segment's worth 10, yeah, even if you are chopping up 10, 7, 8, 5, like 4 people chop it up, it's like, if I have to use Rory, if I have Rory, Scotty, Bryson, and Xander that I can use in a segment, and that gets me the best money and the most and scores well, others won't be able to do that. Not everybody will. So I'm trademarking this right now, but the one and done currently, to your point, is based on the season and the way it sets up, and we'll see what Roll App does. It sounds like it's going to be good things, but it's go sig or go home. And that's really what it comes down to. You've got to go big at the signature events, or you're done. Because you could win 6 of these Valspar type events, pick 6 winners, and not even have $10 million, right? In your bank account. It's pretty crazy. But you can win 4 of the signatures or majors and mix them together and be at like 16 to 20 million, depending on the events or whatever. So 16 plus, like, that's just a huge difference when 24 million got the job done last year. So you're kind of trying to collect the money as you go at these, get what you can, but not burn the guys that you're going to want to use at the signatures. There is no, like, that's what happens in NFL survivors, right? Like, people try and survive so long, but it's like, you need to be able to survive when the world's actually ending at the end. When the survivor ends is typically towards the end. And that's when all the biggest decisions are worth the most EV and the most money. Everyone that's trying to survive in the beginning is like, there's nothing to survive yet. Like, it's not everyone's getting killed. Only some people are. The end of the world, when it happens, is when you need to survive. And that's the same in golf. You need to have these guys that you have as options to stick around and then hope to get those through. So you should really be planning your signature events with what you have left and then making your decision. Somebody just said, I think it was my guy, Timmy Dubs, said, you like a Cantlay or Nick Taylor this week? I don't know. For me, it's going to be what I look at on my stuff. You got to go look. So if you plan out your signature events and your majors and you don't have Cantlay and Nick Taylor, and this is how easy it is, and you don't use Nick Taylor or Cantlay, I can't imagine you would be. So it sounds like there are options at least. And then you work backwards and say, okay, if that's the case, is there somewhere else that I would want Cantlay at, that I would use him, or Nick Taylor, where they're going to be in a weaker field and that, or if I do have Xander at the US Open and I have Hovland later in the season at something, and I have Fitzpatrick later in the season at something, and I'm putting them in for other slots, then now it gets you to your pool for this week of what's left. And then those could become options for you. So I definitely think that would be the way to look at it for me for one and done. Who do we want to use for this week? What are you thinking?
I don't have any strong feelings. I think I'm interested in Homa. I'm interested in Keegan a little bit. He hasn't played well, but he's really low owned. And at this point, I would almost be surprised if I regret having used him earlier in the season. Like I know a lot of people want to save him for the Travelers, for example. I don't really feel a need to save him for anything. So we could use him. We could go Pendrith or Davis Thompson, Rasmus, Wyndham Clark.
Man, it's really like you said, we're trying to collect some money here. So I was thinking of like going a little bit more off the board, but I think like who's the first guy that you mentioned before Keegan? I can't remember. Homa. Yeah, like what else are we saving Homa for?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I
it's
think
like,
it's
oh,
really
people, if
good
he
spot
can't
for
win,
him.
he sucks. He's only had like 32nd places. It's like, again, the field strength is different. He came 32nd at the Players. That's a top field in the world. This is not the top field. And then on top of it, it's like maybe we only collect 300,000 or 240,000 or 500. Like we're just getting money. It doesn't. It's nothing really matters the way the current setup is, except for the signatures. Yes, you want to collect as much as possible along the way, but you do not want your 5 or 6 wins to happen at these events. If those are bonuses on top, you'll take it. I'm not saying don't get them. I'm just saying it matters so much more to who you're not using. And back to your DFS analogy of it's not just who you're playing, but it's who you're not playing. It matters okay, we know we're not using Xander, Hovland, Fitzpatrick, guys like that we can save and use. So I think that's fine. If you wanted to, but honestly, even Corey Connors might show up at a better place later on. He's got his, what is it, the Valero Texas Open that we could always use him at or something like that. Just collect. He can be your collect money guy though, but he's going to be chalky. That's fine. You're trying to collect 500,000. He's probably capable. It's like, that's the type of tournament where the field strength might not be there. I heard a lot of people talk about Brooks, by the way, and I guess we'll use this as like a one and done / betting / DFS topic real quickly before we get out of here. But I do our lanes and stuff in the betting segment, but Brooks Koepka this week. Any thoughts about him being sort of back? I know people kind of like him here. People bet him on all the futures after what they saw last week for the other majors. What's your thoughts on Brooks?
I like his form, but I don't like the course fit. I'd rather save him for one of these types of events where it's a weak field, but it's a ball striker's paradise, especially off the tee. And we just don't get that here. And I also, at this point, want him when putting isn't super predictive like it is this week. So I'll pass on Brooks for one and done this week, even though it's the type of event that I'm very interested in playing him in. And I do agree that I think the form is really, really encouraging. He seems like he's got a lot of it figured out right now.
All right. I'm good with Homa if you are. I like that call.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Anything from a betting breakdown perspective this week? Do you have anything that you're keying in on? Any pick'ems, any outrights, and anything that you saw in the betting side of things?
I don't have any outrights yet. I need to actually make some outrights for this week. The pick'em stuff has been awesome. We had another really good week this past week. We're hitting at 65% on individual picks. You need to hit at 53.5% to be profitable over an underdog. So 65% is a really, really good hit rate. I've been really encouraged by it, and to the point where I think this week I'll probably have even more plays than I've had in the past few weeks. The past few weeks have pretty much been tailored mostly to round 4, but this week I think I'll try to do a lot more on the pick'em side, because I don't feel like I need to have such an advantage anymore now that I know we're hitting at such a big clip. And so a lot of the analysis and the strategy that I've been using has been working really well, and excited to see that come to fruition for 4 rounds instead of 1 this week.
Yeah, Jason, if you can bring this question for next week or throw it in the comments after the show ends live, just because I think talking about that overall percentage thing is a good one to circle back on. It's, again, something that people have had in their mind for good reason, right? They're getting to, I always talk about the penthouse. It's like people get to level 1 of like, yeah, you don't want 150% combined ownership, but there's different things to consider. I just showed you earlier how I won a mega ticket last week with a lineup that would have done quite well in other places too. But I didn't have it exactly in the right spots, but to say, to pay it off, but to get the ticket is nice, but it had nobody under 10 or one guy at 9.22 or something. So we'll talk more about that. Timmy just brought it up that Brandon Adams was like 103. That's the problem, is if you corner yourself into like 85 and do it. I get for like MME and larger field, yes, it's kind of worth it to take on even more risk, because it's like you want those separators when they actually are true separators, the Nico Echeverria type play where it's like, okay, yeah, he's a DFL or a winning player. Like that's kind of what you expect to get out of him, but you kind of want to risk that. But it's not the full picture of it all, and product ownership and things like Alex talked about, and the combinatorial ownership, all that stuff matters a lot more. I agree. Not just Brooks, but any players. The more good players we can see on the tour and the more they're in the mix and playing well, people bitch about it when like Homa and Spieth and JT are back in the mix. Like, oh, of course those losers finally decided to do something. It's like, it's better when they do something. It's actually way better for golf as a whole and for the fans and everybody to be involved. I think last week's players did like a million more or something in the ratings than the previous or something like that. So just, interesting things like that we can see. I think it's definitely solid. And Jason, just to follow up, I know you're asking, that's my point. Actually, it'd be a great example here with Fitzpatrick. You can build good Fitzpatrick lineups if you want to still. And even with him being almost 40, and there will be like, if you think about him as Ludwig last week, Brandon Adams had 38% owned Ludwig and still 103%. So when you force in Fitz, but then also when you play Fitz, but also force in 85% or whatever your magic number you're thinking of is, that's where you can get yourself into trouble, and you could actually block yourself or box yourself out from a win, because there's tons of different ways to build with Fitzpatrick where you could still include other chalk and things like that. But again, topic conversation for another day. Alex, I'll give you the floor because I've got two ready. So I feel like you're going to steal one. I just have that feeling. And if you do, that's okay. I got a backup plan. So give us your leverage lane for the week, talking from a single entry perspective here.
I don't know if I'm going to steal yours. Mine is going to be in response to that conversation I had about where I see so much of this Akshay ownership funneling to, and that is the upper 8K range. I think all these guys are going to get a ton of ownership, and the lower 8K range is going to remain very, very under-owned. So my leverage lane is to kind of hammer this low to mid 8K range. Homa, Clark, Rasmus, Thompson, Taylor Pendrith, Keegan Bradley, all these guys seem like really good plays to me. You can also extend this down a little bit to Smalley, Bez, Olesen, maybe even Cootie a little bit. I think those guys are going to be under-owned because they're sandwiched in between all of the ownership, which is that 7,400 to 7,500 range of McGreevy, Smotherman, Meisner, and then the 86 to 9,000 range of Connors, Nikolai, Thigala, Spawn, Hisatsune. Everyone in between, I think, has a chance to just really slip through the cracks and be totally under-owned.
I like it. And it wasn't mine. So we're good. So actually, the funny concept of this show and how we sort of migrated it as the seasons progressed a little bit is like, you're the single entry, I'm the MME guy. So why not multi-lane it today? A little crisscross, drive across two lanes here, just not into the ditch, hopefully, but just noting it. What I was going to say is, I think my guy Stat brought it up earlier. Him and I, pretty contrarian players. He talks about all the time going in your lane, going 100 miles an hour. I think there's definitely some interest to me now to have like Xander Hovland builds just together, because those Xander Hovland builds skip not only a popular 9K range, but a popular 8K range, which not only skips the plays. Oh, I can't not play Fitzpatrick everywhere. Like all this, like who gives a shit? I'm just saying you get two of the best golfers in the field. And what we talked about earlier is you now cannot get easily, at least, to multiple 7.4K guys, which is where that, so I'm just using that number 73 to 77, however you want to frame it up. My point is you miss on all the popular plays and the popular builds. So I almost certainly have some lineups with Xander and Hovland, right? I like that setup. And then you go down. And then the second one I want to bring up, I actually think this is pretty interesting because I thought this is where you were going earlier, and you didn't fully go there. I liked your way that you put it better because it's different altogether, of you saying like, when people don't land, I'm just checking a number on this guy too. Yeah. When people move off Akshay right now, it's like, who are the people? And it's like those Akshay people sometimes are people that like anchoring. And then other times it's people that like, we got to keep throwing those in there. Sometimes it's people that like recent form. And I like that point because that's where people land now on Bridgman. They land on Fitzpatrick. It just leads to blowing them up more and changes the other build styles. But I thought you were going to say you could also move to like, what type of player is Akshay? What did you like about Akshay? And I think this is true. And I don't know if it's fully true. We're going to find out this week. But I think another really interesting option here is in the 9K range. And I think it's Justin Thomas, right? Just to call it a singular option here. And why I would think that is, I think if you look at like the, some of the numbers you throw out and put things that you put up there, Akshay and JT are like, can be boom bust. They can put up scoring when they do. And it's funny because I don't think he'd be the guy that people would immediately land on. To me, it's going to be obvious. You've got, Xander above, and you got Fitzpatrick and Bridgman below. And then you jump all the way down to that Connors to Rio range that you talked about. So like, even though JT is going to have something, it's like, could it be a situation where he is like the Fleetwood to the Morikawa of last week? If Fitz is going to be 40, but JT is going to be 17, that's quite the gap in those two being in a very similar range. And then the other thing is, what's funny is if you look at JT, 8th place last week, and people can say about how he got there, I don't really care. But funny enough, if you look at how he's done here, 2nd, 10th, 3rd, different player at the time, but just saying his capability in this field strength, I think is fine. So I think he's pretty interesting as well if you land in the 9K range and you want to use JT, but you could also have like a Hovland JT, which would also force the 8K skip of that range that you talked about. And maybe you could still get to your guys in the lower 8K range, combining it all together. So yeah, I really think there's some truly unique ways to build this week. It makes for a much more fun DFS event. Even if you don't love the event itself, or it's, not the greatest field, or however you look at it, we're still in this game to make money, play profitably, and do things that way. So I'm looking forward to it, my friend. Any final thoughts from you? Anything you want to add on my lanes there? If not, you can let the people know where they can find you.
I've got a question for you.
For sure.
Is this a Sungjae week?
Every week is for me, but that's something I've created that situation for myself by playing him pretty much every week. But you know what? I didn't play him this season so far, really. Like a few lineups, I had him in like one single entry where it kind of just fit. And I was like, well, I got to do it for the bit. I'll play him there. I do think he's interesting at 7,100. So I won't say no to Sungjae this week. I just don't know if I have full faith in where I had it up here earlier, the last week's stats too. Like even like, so it's not about like, did he make the cut? Because we know he missed his cut so far, but where was his stats from last week?
I'll tell you why I'm a little bit interested, because historically, Sungjae's a very good iron player, but last year he was an atrocious iron player, like worse than Minwoo Lee with the irons. And we just saw him gain a little bit at the Players. He's playing a new set of irons. And I think there's just a chance that, number one, like we don't know how long that wrist injury was actually bothering him. The wrist injury may have been one of the main reasons why he was struggling with the irons as much as he did last year. It's also just possible that the time off really helped him address the iron issues. So I think the chance that he's going to figure out the irons and that they're going to be good in the next few weeks is a lot higher than it was at any point last year. The chance that he gains, a million strokes on and around the greens, the way he was doing a lot last year, is also a little bit lower, just because, there's rust after that much time off. And it was a little bit unsustainable how much he was gaining around the greens. And part of the reason why he was gaining so much around the greens is because he was missing green after green after green.
Yeah.
So, that can't be as high as it was last year if he actually starts hitting more greens now. But all of that is to say, I do think this is a very good time. 7,100, low owned, in a weak field, a lot of uncertainty that could work in his favor.
I hope it does. I definitely do. What I noticed last week, I remember because I was looking at him for round 2 showdown. In round 1, it looked like he'd actually found the irons. It was pretty sweet. He only made 2 birdies, which was why nobody was looking at him, and his approach looked horrible because in round 1 he lost. Or he barely, I think he like broke even on approach, but there was one bad hole 16. He lost almost 2 strokes on approach. So it was like, oh man, that's all it is. But almost every other hole he was pretty solid on. But in round 2, he started making birdies, but he had like 9 holes where he lost decent on approach again. It was like he did again. So it's so off and on. It's such a small sample. You guys know I don't care about that anyway. So it's like just noting it from your perspective. I think that's a good call. What I like more is just that he's 7,100. He's in a range where not many are landing or nobody's really getting that kind of ownership. And he fits the style of builds that I just talked about there perfectly. So I think that could be good as well. This I'll end on before we get out of here, and I'll let you talk about what you've got going on. But Go Collect said the approach and putting was why I was looking them up. I wonder if the golfers excelling in those 2 categories will garner more ownership sometimes, but I think this was a bit of the one and done code cracking you talked about a little bit, not completely, but just saying like that's what's happening in one and done, where you see people are leaning on typically what the course fit is, right? And like what if it's all bombers, then you see a lot of bombers in one and done, and it goes like that. And so on a week like this, you could definitely see that with the approach and putting, and then the form coming in.
Yeah, there also aren't many guys who like are so clearly elite in those two skill sets the way that Akshay is. So it's hard to say like, oh, if that's what people were looking for, then they're going to go to this player, because there isn't another player who's as good in both categories as Akshay is, other than Xander.
Yeah, let the people know where they can find you, what else you got going on this week. I know you and Pat did the show yesterday. You guys can go check that out. You got your Discord and everything. But yeah, just let everybody know where to find you and what else have you got going on.
Yeah, at Alex Blickle 1 on Twitter, and we just launched a new March Madness simulation tool that's really cool, and it helps someone like me because I don't know a damn thing about college basketball. So I'll be using that to build all my brackets over at FTN Fantasy. And then we also have the PGA Sims there, and yeah, everything with my Discord's the same. Talking a lot of good strategy stuff, and doing a March Madness giveaway, and we've been really hot, as I said, in the props and pick'em. So I really treat props and pick'em as like my version of cash games, where that's how I'm steadily building the bankroll. And then DFS is more of like an upside, and just, give me a ceiling every year. And that kind of formula has been working extremely well. So if you want to add props and pick'em to what you do, I definitely recommend checking out my Discord.
100%. I'm in there. I know Mayo's in there. I know others are as well. Like you said, it's awesome just to see how that's all shaping and taking form. I love stuff like that. And then a lot more strategy stuff as well, like we do over at Mastermind and with Ship It Nation. If you guys want to check out Ship It Nation, you can check it out pretty easily. If you want to just check out for this week, use the code up top, SHIP19, get 5 days for $19. If you go to Join the Nation, it's right there. It makes no sense to take the daily trial just to get today's stuff, especially if you're going to be playing Showdown and you want in the Discord and all of that. You get Saber Sim included. The 5-day trial for $19 is the best deal. You can just go there and click the code. The code, is auto built in. If you click single sport, it will take you to PGA, and then you can get anything from content only up to with Saber Sim, up to with Saber Sim and the Rick Run Good tools for less than $45 a month for everything, but as low as $25 a month if you want just the Discord, the content, the stone, all the other stuff that we offer. And then our man, Matt Gannon, this week is out there, boots on the ground. Again, he's just on a tear right now, checking it all out. He's got the Boots Bullets. He's got the Boot Show coming up here shortly. And then he'll have everything in the Slate plan with myself and Hoop as well. Check it out. If you guys want to find me on X at ToeTagginTambo. MLB back soon, like my man Nate says. Appreciate everybody for watching. We'll be back next week. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.